Morning.
Morning.
It's wonderful to be back here.
It's on.
Now it's off.
Oh.
It's great to be here this morning. As many of you may know, after my wife and Karen and I graduated from college, we joined the Peace Corps. This would have been in 1970. As part of the application process, we were asked to specify any country preferences we might have. Our response was basically, send us wherever you want. Much to our surprise and delight, the Peace Corps decided to send us to Micronesia, a group of tropical islands in the west central Pacific Ocean. Now, given the fact that we had planned on getting married before we entered the Peace Corps, this had all of the hallmarks of a government-paid honeymoon on a tropical island. And to be honest, in many ways it was, though to be fair, we worked hard as volunteer teachers for that 2-year period. The island on which we served was called Yap. It was one of the so-called high islands, volcanic islands. The village in which we lived was on the opposite side of the island from the school where we taught and the main town. So just about every day we would have to ride our motorcycle over the top of the island and back down to the other side. Now, the most spectacular part of that trip was on the way home. To get there, we rode up to the crest of a hill and then back down to the trail into our village. As we reached the top of the hill, there spread out before us the vast vista of the Philippine Sea, part of the Pacific Ocean. In the daylight, if the sun was out, the sea shimmered in the distance. If it was just at sunset, obviously the colors were overwhelming. And if it was after dark, the sky was a vast expanse of stars. There being virtually no light pollution, the electricity had not yet reached that part of the island, we could see countless stars that were not obstructed in any way unless it was a cloudy night. And because the island was at 8 degrees north of the equator, we could see both the North Star and the Southern Cross. For the entire 2 years that we regularly took that trip, I was always in constant awe of the beauty of this site, and I can still see it in my mind's eye. Now, this was a time in my life when we, like many other people our age, both then and now, had turned away from our Lutheran upbringing and professed a profound disinterest in, or perhaps even dislike of, religion or spirituality. Despite having attended Lutheran-sponsored colleges, or perhaps because of it, our religious faith had been weakened rather than enhanced by the experience. Yet, while I would not have had language to articulate it at the time, my experience on that island road on those days or nights provided the spirituality that my prior religious experiences and my times in college had not. I participated in what I would later find described in our Unitarian Universalist Sources of the Living Tradition as a, quote, direct experience of that transcending mystery and wonder affirmed in all cultures, which moves us to a renewal of the spirit. For myself, and perhaps for many of you as well, for much of our lives, spirituality and religion had been something mediated through so-called sacred scriptures, religious institutions such as the church, religious leaders such as pastors, and religious rituals performed on Sunday and on special holy days, often more as a matter of routine than sincere professions of faith. Now note here that I am speaking for myself. For many, traditional religious experiences are deep and meaningful. But I suspect that I'm not alone in finding feelings of awe and wonder in other ways and other places. As I will discuss in a few minutes, for many the natural world provides a sense of the sacred or a place of transcendent meaning. For others, an uplifting musical performance, perhaps presented in a building of architectural genius or even in an ordinary space, used in an extraordinary way, can be a bridge to what we call the transcendent. This direct experience is, in a sense, a dialogue between an individual and his or her surroundings, the place, the situation, the particular circumstances. One time in college, I was helping make tape recordings of our annual Messiah concert. I'd not been particularly familiar with the entire Messiah, but that night, hearing it played over and over and over again, I found myself drawn into the music and even singing along with it in that empty radio studio. It was just me and the Luther College Choir. For me, this was another direct experience of transcendent mystery and wonder as I listened to Handel's masterpiece, though again, I probably would not have had such language to use. Now, direct experience of the sacred is as old as humanity's struggle to understand the world. One can imagine pre-scientific humans observing the wonders of nature, whether it was magnificent thunderstorms and flashing lightning on the vast prairies, or the panoply of stars in the night sky. These earlier humans may have been trying to discern their meaning and their place in the universe. Not having the tools of modern science, to understand these phenomena, they could only rely on their felt sense of what it all meant. As society advanced and we gained greater scientific understanding of the world, we lost some of the intuitive sense of meaning. Yet even today, when we think we understand the natural phenomena, we still cannot help but hark back to the awe and wonder of our ancient ancestors in those far-off plains or forests in the pre-scientific times. One of our challenges as a species has been how to increase our scientific understanding of the natural world without losing our sense of wonder. The Unitarian movement in New England faced a similar challenge in the early 19th century. At this time, Unitarianism was emerging from New England Congregationalism as a separate religious path. One of the hallmarks of what William Ellery Channing referred to as Unitarian Christianity was the ascendance of reason and rationality in religion. While Unitarians relied on Christian scriptures for their beliefs, these were scriptures as understood from the emerging higher criticism. This was a process promoted by German biblical scholars, which approached the Bible as a human book written by human authors that should be studied like any other human writing. Into this debate, however, in the early 1800s, stepped a young Cambridge minister and a protege of William Ellery Channing, Ralph Waldo Emerson. Emerson was part of a group of writers and scholars who believed that religion in general, and Unitarianism in particular, was too cold and rational, what Emerson derided as the corpse-cold Unitarianism of Harvard College and Brattle Street. These writers found Unitarians' emphasis on reason deprived it of a spiritual dimension. This group of writers and intellectuals, known as the Transcendentalists, saw the world with different eyes, more intuitive, more sensing, more feeling eyes. Their core beliefs have been described online in an online New World Encyclopedia as follows. Among the Transcendentalist core beliefs was an ideal spiritual state, which transcends the physical and empirical and is only realized through the individual's intuition, rather than through logical deduction or the doctrines of established religion. They also emphasized the essential unity of all creation and the innate good of humanity, which they believed would manifest itself if given the freedom to do so. The Transcendentalist approached spiritual truth not to look at the scriptural revelation or church doctrine, but rather to charge each person to have their own direct connection with the sacred. In addition to the German and English Romantics, they were influenced by Hindu spirituality. For example, Henry David Thoreau kept a copy of the Bhagavad Gita with him during the sojourn at Walden Pond. In 1838, Emerson left the ministry, ostensibly because of a disagreement over communion, but more likely because of his disillusionment with the ministry in general. He embarked on a successful career as a public lecturer and essayist. On July 15th of 1838, he delivered his famous Divinity School address, which we heard a portion of this morning. It was delivered to the graduating class of Harvard Divinity School. There were only 8 students in that class. In his controversial talk, he challenged some of the basic tenets of Christianity from a transcendentalist perspective and offered some pointed criticism of the art of preaching by Unitarian ministers. Needless to say, neither set of observations was well received by the Unitarian notables. Among the attendees at the Divinity School address was another young Unitarian minister from the Boston area, Theodore Parker. Parker shared Emerson's radical views of Christianity, which he laid out in a May 19, 1841 sermon, The Transient and Permanent in Christianity. In that sermon, Parker argued that the teachings of Jesus, as recorded in the Gospels, represent what he called pure religion, and would be a sound basis for religious belief and practice, even if Jesus himself were not a historical figure. Like Emerson's Divinity School address, these ideas of Parker were not well received, and to be considered a Parkerite was a serious term of derision. Parker himself was a social activist, deeply involved in the abolition and Underground Railroad movements. In fact, he was reputed to have kept a pistol in his desk to defend the fugitive slaves hiding in the basement of his church. He was also a secret advisor to John Brown, the radical militant abolitionist who engaged in the Harper's Ferry attack. And Parker's, we believe, was at least knowledgeable of, if not involved in the planning of that event. Now, Jacob Lloyd-Jones, a prominent figure in the Western Unitarian Conference out here in the Midwest, was also a follower of Parker and carried his radical views to Western Unitarianism. And to this day, the Midwest, the great Mid-America region, is strongly influenced by Parker, Jones, and other radicals, as well as the humanists of the 20th century. We're kind of the troublemakers out here. Another prominent member of the Transcendentalist group was Margaret Fuller, whose words we heard this morning. Fuller was a teacher, author, editor, and women's rights activist, and was a close friend and confidant of Emerson. She was the editor of the Transcendentalist journal, The Dial, and the author of Women in the 19th Century. She was a key figure in promoting the Transcendentalist ideas, both within and without the Unitarian movement. Now, Transcendentalism had a significant impact on the development of Unitarianism in the United States. Professor David Bumbaugh, one of my favorite teachers at Meadville, observed that both Unitarianism and Universalism found their distinctive voices the farther away they moved from the Orthodox Christian consensus. With its emphasis on individual spiritual development, unorthodox views of the meaning of Jesus in Christianity, and its interest in Eastern religions, Unitarianism moved away from being just another liberal Christian denomination and more towards being a separate and autonomous religious movement. Another area where Transcendentalism had its impact on Unitarian Universalist views of spirituality related to spirituality in the natural world. Our first reading this morning was from the opening words of Emerson's Divinity School address. Now, I've read that address many times, and only as I got into preparing this sermon did I realize the importance and significance of those words. It was an effort, I think, by Emerson to infuse in Unitarianism something that we now refer to as earth-based spirituality. The language is rich and sensual. It appeals not just to the intellect, but also to the senses. In another essay of Emerson's, Nature, we find these words: "In the woods, we return to reason and faith. There I feel that nothing can befall me in life, no disgrace, no calamity, leaving me my eyes which nature cannot repair. Standing on the bare ground, my head bathed by the blithe air and uplifted into infinite space, all mean egotism vanishes. I become a transparent eyeball. I am nothing. I see all. The currents of the universal being circulate through me. I am part or particle of God. Now, one of the important theological terms for Unitarian Universalism in the latter part of the 20th century was our theological and spiritual understanding of our relationship with the natural world. We adopted our beloved seventh principle, identifying us as part of the interdependent web of existence of which we are a part. And we recognized as part of our sources of the living tradition the sixth source, spiritual teachings of earth-centered traditions which celebrate the sacred circle of life and instruct us to live in harmony with the rhythms of nature. Another recent theological development is what we call religious naturalism. Reverend William Murray observes in his book that religious naturalism finds religious meaning in the natural world. Another theologian, Jerome Stone, says that religious naturalism denies the existence of a separate realm such as God or soul or heaven to provide meaning. Positively, Stone says, it affirms that attention should be focused on this world to provide whatever explanation and meaning are possible in this life. For Murray, religious naturalism appears to be a natural outgrowth of Emerson's views of nature and the spiritual aspects of the natural world. Murray writes, for religious naturalists, living in a natural environment is a spiritual experience. Freed from supernaturalism, the religious naturalist can be devoted to a nature that nurtures and sustains. It is not incidental that people speak of Mother Earth. Our ties to nature are deep and intimate. Now, as I wrote these reflections, I was sitting on my sun porch enjoying the change of seasons and reflecting how blessed I am to live in this beautiful place on earth. I'm reminded of the horrific pictures on the television news from places of conflict and natural devastation around the world. It is particularly sad that so often the wanton destruction is depicted in the name of religious so-called values. While direct connection to the spiritual is a key component of our religious life, in my view, this is not enough. Thich Nhat Hanh, Buddhist monk, teacher, and peace activist, promotes a form of Buddhism that he calls engaged Buddhism. Similarly, Theodore Parker, one of the Transcendentalist leaders, kept that proverbial pistol in his desk. Now, I'm not one to promote the use of violence or the use of weapons, but I do admire Parker's actions to promote freedom and the abolition of slavery. So let it be our hope and prayer, if you are inclined to pray, that religion may become a source of good and not harm for all. As we attempt to personally connect with whatever we deem sacred or holy, may we also find a way to make our religion not just a practice of personal introspection and piety, but also a time for engagements with the problems of this world. Blessed be.